Thank you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chuck Eng. I'm the president of the Berkeley Chinese Alumni International Association, and we're the host. And thank you very much for joining. This is actually part two of our June 19 dialogues, and we're really excited. We actually had our first one exactly on the day of Juneteenth, June 19th. And so this is actually follow-on discussions between the, you know, uh, Black female leaders and also our student leaders. So I'm really excited about that. So today's, the structure is we're gonna have, a set of questions and set of dialogues between the leaders and the students. And then following that, we are gonna have the breakout sessions with the three female leaders. So please, please join us on that as well. And but I also want to acknowledge, before we jump into the program itself, we're really wanted to acknowledge to my co-organizer Terry Wong, which is based out of Ohio. So Terry, please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Welcome, everyone. My name is Terry Wong. I am so happy to see so many faces here and today. I'm very excited for this dialogue, which is a continuation, as Chuck had mentioned, of our June 19th dialogue series. And that dialogue started with the simple recognition that June 19th is Juneteenth, the day of celebrating the end of slavery in the United States, a holiday, and also the day that Vincent Chen, who was a Chinese American man, and he unfortunately was murdered in Detroit, Michigan in 1985 on the same day. But his death led to the kind of revitalization of the modern civil rights movement for the Asian American community. So we thought that this coincidence of dates really represents the fact that the struggle for civil rights, the struggle for everyone to be seen equal in this society is persistent, right? We make strides. There's always capacity to grow, capacity to understand each other. And this dialogue is very exciting to me because it was driven by students. And if you can, and please realize that they actually wrote these questions themselves. They're so thoughtful and so willing to use their own life experiences to help us understand where we can go as a society. So half of the students are from the Ohio area. There's two from California, and we even have one from Shanghai, China. So we're very well represented in their views from across the world. And thank you again for joining us.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. So with that said, let me just start with our female leaders. So I'm really excited to have three outstanding Black women leaders from actually throughout the U.S., not just in California, but also, as Terry mentioned, in the Midwest. I will start with my good friend and the executive director of the California Alumni Association, which is actually, we have more than 500,000 strong alumni under her umbrella and her leadership. So Chloe, please, tell us a little bit about your early life, your background, and your path that you've taken.
And thank you for organizing this. I am so honored to be able to speak to you this evening. My early life really started out in poverty in rural Ithaca, New York. My mother decided that she would take myself and my sisters, and then we moved to inner city poverty in North Philadelphia. And I'm telling you, North Philadelphia is probably the worst inner city poverty anyone wanted to see, because we were surrounded by drugs and violence. At one point, my mother decided, if we stayed in North Philly, we were going to die. But in the meantime, while we were there, she became a real grassroots organizer, got very involved in the civil rights movement. And in the place where we lived, she trained freedom riders to go to the South, and she trained them in nonviolent resistance. At one point, we moved to San Francisco, where I live today. And when we moved, we had no place to live. My mother had no job at that point. I was the eldest, and I had two younger sisters. So we arrived in San Francisco homeless, but we had lots of dreams. It was during that time, a place I used to go was called the Community Streetwork Center. And I met a man that became like my godfather. His name was Percy Pickney. And one of the people that was his close friend was Jerry Brown. And I met Jerry Brown when I was 16. And he convinced me to go to UC Berkeley. And I followed him. I followed his campaigns and everything about him. Like someone would I was like a fly on the tail of a horse, and I was going for the ride. So that's how I entered UC Berkeley. I graduated in '76 in political science. And because everybody I knew in the Brown organization had at some point been a lawyer, I then went to law school. It was during the time that I was in law school, I met Justice Clinton White, who's probably one of the most significant defense attorneys of our time. And he convinced me, as well as all of his mentees, one of them was John Burrs, who some of you might have heard about on the front lines of social justice, to go into the district attorney's office in order to reform the criminal justice system. So I went into the San Francisco district attorney's office. I became one of the first women, not to mention Black women, special prosecution investigators, and then assistant district attorneys. And as a pioneer in that area, I had the opportunity to open the way for so many that came after me, such as our Vice President, Kamala Harris. And it was during that time I decided I wanted to get administrative experience. So I then went to the State Bar of California, which is in charge of admitting attorneys to practice law, and became an administrator. And at a number of years after my children had gotten a lot older, I then returned to my original dream in public policy and went to work for Governor Gray Davis, overseeing the State and Consumer Services Agency, many other agencies, being Director of General Services. But then I wasn't even done, because I was recruited by international law firms. I became a partner in international law firms, representing numerous organizations, corporations around the world. And then my whole world opened up to me, and I was able to travel frequently to China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, India. And after a career of being an attorney, a high-level state and federal lobbyist, I came back to where it all began, to raise the next generation of leaders as executive director of the Cal Alumni Association. And I am the first person of color in this role in over 150 years. And I'm really happy to be here, to be with so many of the incoming leaders of the next generation.
Thank you so much, Koi. It's amazing journey that you had, and I tell you, the things that you've done have been tremendous. And one of the things that I'm so amazed is because you actually in fact introduced me to the first female Asian American state controller, Betty Yee, who is also a distinguished Berkeley alum. And so I really appreciate the bridges that you've built between the various minorities, between the Black, between the Chinese, and also various communities of people of color. So really appreciate your leadership at Berkeley. So on that note, another trailblazer, which is the first, the only Black woman who is a UC Regent in our system right now, LaFanza. LaFanza, please tell us about your background and your journey as well.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and to all the students. I just am continually inspired by the next generation of leaders, and every moment that I get to interact with all of you, it really does give me hope. And despite any negativity that exists, every time I get to engage with our young leaders, I am inspired. So thank you, Chuck and Terry, for bringing, and all of the students for really bringing this dialogue together. It's an honor to be a part of a conversation with such incredible panelists, Julie and Chloe. I look forward to being in this conversation tonight. My path is one that may have taken some different sort of twists and turns, but I think a journey in the same direction of figuring out and doing my part to make our society and our communities stronger and more just places for all of us who call them home. I grew up as a child of the Deep South. I was born in Mississippi. I spent a lot of time in Louisiana. By the time I was 16, my father had died of a heart disease. And so I went to a historically Black college in Mississippi. And similarly to Chloe, my frame of reference for social justice was the civil rights movement. A little bit of probably a different generation, but I had college professors who were activists in the civil rights movement who sought very much to show up and demonstrate for all of us. And I majored in political science, but sought to show up and demonstrate for everyone in my class, and in our program, the sacrifice, the courage that it takes to actually create change, and frankly, the commitment to conversations like this. Instead of going to law school after being accepted, I actually chose to join the labor movement. And again, that was not my frame of reference for social justice, but I surely saw it as a means to social justice, a way for everyday people to come together and do extraordinary things. And so I worked from 2 weeks after I graduated from college as an organizer and leader in the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. And by the time I left SEIU about 3 years ago, I was the president of the largest union in California, the second largest union in the country. And when our now vice president was considering offering herself to the country as a candidate for president in 2019, I joined her consulting team and served as a senior advisor to her campaign. Once she decided to withdraw from the campaign, she got resettled into the U.S. Senate. I sought to really find what was going to be my next contribution to this pursuit of justice for all. And I decided to actually settle in at the intersection of technology, government, and communities of color. And I joined Airbnb, San Francisco company. But I joined Airbnb as the director of public policy and campaigns for North America. As Chuck mentioned, in 2018, Governor Brown appointed me to the UC Board of Regents, where I have served and tried to continue to be a voice, an ear as well as a voice for all who call California home, and every student who is a part of the UC system, and those families who are aspiring to be a part of the UC system. And so it's an honor really to be a part of this conversation, to figure out how we can bridge gaps, name uncomfortable truths, and hopefully create real pathways to mutual dialogue and understanding.
Well, thank you very much. So, this is an amazing story that you share with us.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Chuck.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much, LaFonza, for the amazing work that you've done representing labor and also representing the UC system. We've also just heard from Chloe, but there's incredibly diversity and leadership within the Black community. So we're very honored to have Julie, who's a very talented artist, all the way from Ohio. So Julie, please share with us your journey.
Thank you. In 2016, I returned from New York City to the community that I grew up in. So I've had a lot of opportunity to revisit my past. I'm the daughter of an artist who worked in many different mediums. She worked across disciplines and also in theater. And her her paternal lineage tended to be creative artists and musicians and makers of various different kinds as a way of improvising, a means of living, and taking and combining materials to make your own clothing, or experimenting with furniture, whatever necessity was called for. And my father was the first Black electrical journeyman at the Alcoa, the Aluminum Company of America. So they both were activists in the sense that they cracked places over and over again that hadn't generally been open to people of color and to Black people. So I didn't think that I would step into my mother's shoes and become an artist. I thought I would study political science. So I headed to Boston to BU. I didn't care for it that much because I was used to smaller schools. My 8th grade graduating class had 12 people. And so I decided to apply to Antioch College, where I could then, again, improvise, piece together a curriculum that interested me. And some of that took me to New York City on co-op or abroad. And I fell in there was an era of mentorship where artists didn't have to be a degree or have PhDs or masters. They taught what they knew. And there was a lot of heritage based on the WPA program and something called CETA. So it was fairly easy to gain employment or to work with other artists. I think the sense of public space at that time was very powerful in the big Rust Belt cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. This is the industrial manufacturing headquarters of the world from the 19th century. Rockefeller from here, Thomas Edison from not too far, the Wright brothers from Ohio, Ford in Detroit, rubber in Akron, and but now you have a great gap between the wealth of the Standard Oil family and the heritage of the city, and Cleveland's the #1 most impoverished city. So I think that I decided to that the arts that was the best way to have poetic license, to be the fool or the jester and say what I wanted to say to power in disguise. And so I fell into music. And then, to make a long story short, arts education was key. I started working for Teachers and Writers Collaborative, met many amazing writers there, from June Jordan to Grace Paley. It's hard to separate artists from activism, because that's also your survival route a lot of times, because you don't really have, what was I going to say? the typical patterns of growth in a career. You have to kind of invent it. I did consultation and curriculum development work for the Guggenheim, Studio in the School, Lincoln Center, you name it, museums and institutions. And then I ended up back where I was born and trying to give back, because I could see that all the playgrounds and all the kind of great wealth that used to be accessible when I was young is no longer here. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thanks a lot, Julie. And thank you for, sharing your story. It's great to know the talent in the, Black community. So, and thank you for all three of you guys for sharing your journey, incredible journey there. And this is really a dialogue, as Terry and I have mentioned, at the very beginning, and actually wouldn't be possible without, of course, the contributions of the student leaders. And we're very happy that we have engagements from them. And so the first one is we're gonna have Jessica to engage and ask the first question. Jessica, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so my name is Jessica and I'm a high school student from Shanghai, China. So I'm studying for my IB diploma in one of the most famous high school in Shanghai. And since I am a Chinese student and I don't have lots of opportunities to get access to the true life experience of Black people and Asian Americans, so I'm actually pretty excited and curious about the cultural differences and similarities between these different people. So I also prepared to go to the university in the US, thus I'm excited and curious about the culture and some perspectives of local people there. Because I believe it could help me to bridge the gap and promote conversation between different people. So the first question I want to ask is about arts. So I want to ask Julie that some people, they may aim for art to unite communities, while others believe art should challenge preconceived notions. So I wonder, what is the role and meaning of art to you?
Well, I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. I see them as forms of play and a practice of curiosity and an engagement with the materials of the world, whether it consists of other human beings, for instance, in theater, or with pieces of paper. But for me in particular, because I grew up in a time when people were it wasn't a time of consumerism, and people, my grandfather had a term called making do when I would ask him what he was doing, and that's what he said, making do, putting things together and having fun and just exploring. I don't see the arts as that different, that much different than the sciences. They both explore and investigate ideas of truth and possibilities. So fast forward to coming back to Cleveland, I began to, without thinking about it, just work with what was in my most immediate environment, which is trash or found objects. One person's trash is another person's treasure, and assembling visual art with the found materials. One doesn't have to have an art store. I just rely on scissors and glue. And when I was young, you had to make your own glue in school. That was one of the first things you did. You made wheat paste. If you were really but those scissors and glue, and I just started from there. But one needs a place, whether it's out in nature or a studio space. So I find another creative activity, like as my mother did, was creating places for people to come together. And art has as with many other disciplines, an inherent community based on those who inspired one, that have, from the past. So I see all those ghosts or spirits around me, and that helps give me heart and I feel like that is a powerful community. And artists have been persecuted in different contexts throughout times. Like even now, when there's unrest, they usually go for the throat of the journalist. Because art at its most basic is a form of communication. It's that simple. Art can be an action that interrupts something or helps shifts a person's gaze so they can see something they didn't notice before. So it's also a form of reading. It's a information, and just being curious about the world you're in. There's so much that's fascinating and so much beauty in the world. I often work with very fragile items like leaves and things are held together by spider webs or by push pins, and very ephemeral, temporary work, because I know I'm going to find another something else that fascinates me that might intrude on that and push those pieces out of the way. So in my work, it's kind of anti-capitalist, anti-consumer, anti-thingification. I just like the movement of process and ideas and thinking and the rituals that one can make up to apply oneself in those different contexts. I hope I
Very
hope
good.
I
No, that's
answered.
really helpful. That's very creative too, Julie. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And and with that said, actually, I wanted to bring on Serena. Serena, please.
So hi, everyone. My name is Serena Lee, and I'm a rising senior at Saratoga High School. And I'm really excited about this event because for the Juneteenth event, I also helped plan that event. And I've been involved in like Asian American activism. I've wrote news stories about standing up for Asian hate. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because from last time's event, I learned a lot about the commonalities and misunderstandings that we have between the Black community and the Asian community. And I feel like we can really explore more of that today, and we can hear from these great female leaders from different perspectives of like art, education, labor, law, and I'm really excited about today's dialogue. So my question is for LaFonza. And it's that you have a really unique perspective as the only Black female regent for the UC system and as a previous union president and working in Airbnb. So what role, in your opinion, does the academic world play in the lives of everyday workers?
Yeah, one would think after a year and a half, I would have worked out all of the kinks of Zoom. But thank you so much for such a thoughtful question, Serena. And before I answer, I just really want to appreciate Julie's response to that last question, the notion of art and as a form of communication and juxtaposing that with journalism. I thought was really insightful and will be a gem and a gift that I will take away from this conversation so far. And I appreciate the question, Serena. I think about this in probably 3 ways that I would just try to offer you to for us to think about as we continue our talk tonight. I think about the role of academia and research for everyday people. One, of course, it is a place of future aspirations for not only workers themselves, but for their children. Every generation wants their children to do better than them. And we have been, and it is no doubt that education is a very strong tool through which to make that happen. So I think the academic world is key to the future aspirations and dreams of everyday people. I think it is also particularly in the context of UC, but I think this is the case for universities and the academic world all across the country and indeed around the world. But it also is a place of economic mobility. UC is very intent on being the employer of choice, and what that means by having life-sustaining salary, and wages for people who work there, benefits that they can, extend to themselves and their families, opportunities to retire with dignity. And so that place of as the third largest employer in the state of California, I think UC is very much grounded in the working community, in the community of workers who work there as a real place for economic mobility for themselves and their families. And the real, I think, gift at UC is a majority of that workforce are unionized. And so not only are they, working at a world-renowned institution, but they also have the right to challenge that institution to help make that institution better for workers and for its community by being active members of their union and collective bargaining agreements and raising the voices of the members when the university or the system where there might be a blind spot. My third and last point, and this was very important to my role and success as a labor leader, but I think again this is really universally true beyond just my journey and experience. But the role I think we have to acknowledge that the academic world really play in terms of the data and the research framework that creates that creates sort of the path to change. And but let me try to give you a couple of examples just to make that come alive. When we were talking with Governor Brown about the importance of raising the minimum wage in cities all across California and eventually the state of California, it was the UC Berkeley Labor Center that actually did the research, that actually created the footing, the foundation, the premise for all of the different pieces. And it's a very complicated piece of legislation, but that created the foundation for the legislation that was eventually moved forward. It was the UCLA Labor Center that actually helped to create the LA Black Worker Center. That is the center for project labor agreements, making sure that government funding is actually going to be used in construction, are actually going to be dedicated towards hiring workers from those communities where that construction is taking place. And so that is like two just very concrete examples where I feel like that the academic world, the practical world, the lives of workers and government and public policy really do intersect with making the lives of regular people better. And I think, that is, hopefully that's a lot of what we'll be helping to foster in this conversation tonight and with this series of dialogues, like taking our individual journeys and experiences, applying it to our practical everyday lives and trying to make that better.
Fanza, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Actually, there's 2 points that really resonated well with me. The first thing is about the American dream, and that's exactly how sort of my family, when we were, actually one of the reasons why we, like my parents decided to immigrate to the U.S. is actually provide better opportunities for myself and my two sisters, my siblings. So that's for sure. And then secondly, I think you'll be very pleased to hear that actually I had the chance of talking to the most successful president of Stanford University, John Hennessy, and what he said to me, and this is something that you'll be very pleased as a UC leader and as a labor leader, is he said that despite under his leadership at Stanford, that he actually had provided low-income students, free of tuitions to attend Stanford, but they're not doing enough. And so essentially UCs and are still the role model for uplifting, providing economic mobility for people of California. So, thank you so much, I think for what you represent and your representations at the UC system. Thank you. Following that, I want to bring up John. John, please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is John. I am a rising senior at Bellarmine College Preparatory, which is a high school in the Bay Area, specifically in San Jose. I think I've done a lot of, I've been involved in a lot of local activism, and I've personally witnessed a lot of misunderstandings between the Asian and Black communities that don't come from a place of malice. So I'm excited to have this conversation as a step to bridging these misunderstandings and learning from these amazing women that are prominent leaders in all their careers. I do want to also comment on Lafonza's previous response. Just like Chuck, it's the story of Chuck. It's the story of my parents as immigrants, that education and academia is a medium for economic mobility. It's actually the way they immigrated here in the first place on the education visa. So that really resonated with me. While we're talking about careers, I wanted to ask Chloe a question. I know you were previously a partner at multiple national law firms, and among various issues, you deal with diversity. I wanted to ask you, what does diversity mean to you, and how can we best foster diverse teams and communities?
Thank you. Well, when I think of diversity, I think of number one, representation. Representation across all factors of America: corporate, nonprofit, foundation, government. But representation is not enough, because I'm not talking about like token representation. I think of, the play Hamilton, and there was a phrase, "I want to be in the room when it happens." Real diversity, equity, and inclusion means that all genders, all races, religions are at the table and have a say in the decision making, in particular for people of color, and in particular for women. Now, I think there's been enough studies to show that the more diversity you have within an organization, the stronger the organization. In a corporation, the more profitable. But what are the things that kind of prevent that from happening? And many times when we look at ourselves, we have to realize that diversity starts with us. And one of the biggest barriers is individuals like to be with people who have similar views, similar cultures, because to go outside that and transcend the differences means you might be uncomfortable. But it's only through transcending those differences are we going to create peace. Are we going to grow? Now, I like this phrase and I say Regent Butler, and I say Regent Butler because she is my boss. She oversees all UCs, so she's my boss. But she had this phrase. She said, you got to be, in order to achieve true diversity, you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I want to give you this example. When I first went to school in rural upstate New York, I went to school, I was the only Black student when I started out in elementary school. And then when my mother moved us, when I was 9 years old, to inner city Philadelphia, I went from a white environment to an environment that was all Black. And at that point, I had to adjust. I had to transcend the difference. And it was very uncomfortable. And then at the age of 14, my mother drove across country to San Francisco. And I entered a high school called Galileo. And Chuck knows this high school well, because that high school was over 90% Chinese.
Yes, indeed.
Not only was a high school over 90% Chinese, I was living in what is Japantown in San Francisco. And in each time, I was uncomfortable, but I was able to transcend the differences even though each time it was a new environment, it was a new culture, it was new people that I had no familiarity with at all. But by transcending those differences, I grew as a person, but it's what enabled me to have that global perspective, to be able to travel the world, no matter what country you put me in, to be able to be comfortable. And I think that things that help us to do this is through dialogue. Just dialogue like we're having right now is extremely important to have the understanding of the different perspectives. I'm also a strong believer in unconscious bias because we all have our biases and we've got to be able to face them, confront them in order to be able to bridge the gaps that we currently have in this country. So when we start moving towards true diversity and inclusion, and making sure everyone has a seat at the table and has a piece of that power, particularly the economic power. That's when we have true diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well said, Chloe. Actually, I love what you said. A seat at the table, not just a token representation. Well said. And I really believe it. I think that's very important. And in fact, on that note, and actually, you not only graduated from Galileo, the current mayor, you'll be very pleased to know, the London breed, also another Galileo graduate as well. So, on that note, and also actually, I also wanted to acknowledge there is a Dan asked a question: how can Black and Asian communities interact more positively at the middle and high school levels? Actually, he then reads our mind, because actually, in fact, our next question specifically addresses that. So, I'm going to have, please, Jessica, please, on your question there.
Okay, so now I have a question for you, like for the three of ladies you are. And this question is about the different ethnicities at schools. So since I have learned and heard about lots of information of the local international school in Shanghai, so sometimes I will see friend groups of the same ethnicities and have experienced conflicts based on race. And so I wonder what fuels this type of segregation and stereotyping, and what can we do to foster empathy and friendship?
Anyone can answer?
Yes.
Thank you for your question. Well, I think it's also important to think about class and in general in relation to these things. I think it's important to understand that some people came here by relative choice. Some people were forced here as refugees, and some people were dragged here in chains, and all kinds of pots and shards and weapons and water hoses have been fired at those individuals, even when they enter elementary school. As someone who's taught both on the university level and with young children, you see people's biases, conscious or unconscious, will find the quirks of a different culture in the kid and then put them in special ed. Or so there's always this kind of policing that happens. I don't think that people hanging around with their own kind is necessarily a bad thing. One doesn't have to be threatened by that because of people may be hanging together because of shared languages, foods, and that's just their comfort zone. And but walking up to someone in well, let me just say this. I think one way if you really wish to bridge those gaps, food is a great share a table. You can do that as a kid and as a young person in your own learning environment. Music, sports, even God forbid, even the military, people are forced or compelled to be find what they have in common and under tough circumstances also. And also, I think humans right now are called to think about diversity in the larger sense of biodiversity and inclusion, and how you can't understand human nature without understanding nature. So yesterday I said something about being just a nobody. I was going to say I'm just a bug, which is a kind of a Buddhist perspective around being small and humble, and that's one's greatness also can come from that, and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and also to learn to step outside of judgment. And we see things so much with our eyes, and we need to learn to listen. There are very few words that describe the act of listening. What are they? To hear, to put an ear to, but there are hundreds and hundreds of words that stem from sight: to peer, insight, interrogate, and investigate, a video, on and on and on. But if you were blind, if we were all blind, would we wouldn't be looking at race. And so, you can play with, there's a poet named C.A. Conrad, and also Cecilia Vicuña, who create rituals to bring people together. And then one of the most obvious ones is music. Instruments having to either blend together or go against, or tangle with each other. And so I say, be a bug. Learn about the world as not just this anthropocentric view, with humans gazing at their navel. I think we're called for that. I really like what Thoreau said: in wildness lies the preservation of the world, or the salvation of the world. So not the lawn, but the forest, which is teeming with life. But trying to control things in a lawn might be the same thing that happens in our schools. Boxes, and putting this here, and some people don't even feel like they fit into the box assigned to them. We may see someone and say they are Black or this or that, but their heritage and bloodlines may tell a different story. So who are we? I think there are very few people foregrounding love. LaFonza and Chloe may recall in the 60s and 70s, people were walking around flashing peace signs and talking, and love. People weren't afraid to use the word love. I listen out for that word, and I'm not hearing it as much as I heard it as a child. And also what we're dealing with in terms of the environment, equal justice, economic justice, all these things are entwined. But what we are, when President Carter was in office, he had solar panels on the White House. We were alarmed about pollution. It's just that we lost time because consumerism and extractive capitalism pushed things in another direction. But this crisis of climate change we were notified of what was coming. And it's a nightmare for me to realize that despite all that hard work, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, Cleveland's Carl Stokes, he was the first Black mayor of a large city. And that was a continuation of MLK's vision. He felt that if there was a Black head of a major city, then they would be able to rein in some of the police. And so we're still working on those issues.
Really, on that note, actually, I want Chloe to chime in on that, because Chloe, you travel into so many different places, and as you said, you live in many different cities, and then you actually have actually developed these relationships with people. So how has that helped you to be very effective? Just what Julie was commenting. If you could comment on that, and then before we move on to the next question. But please, Chloe.
It's taken me a long time to learn that it's really the voice and the heart. It's the soft power that really creates the movement. And something that Julie said that's so important is learning to listen, learning to listen, and not necessarily just, because I in my early 20s and early 30s, I was like pounding the table, and I was loud and I was forceful. And then I learned the importance of soft power, which is learning to communicate with my heart and learning empathy. Now, I'll be the first one to say, I love my girls' night out crowd. And my girls, we've been together for years and years and years, and I feel so comfortable with them. But I have really grown as a human being by connecting with those groups that maybe I didn't have anything in common with in the very beginning. It is really through them that my whole world opened up. So having that empathy for everyone that you encounter. And even though you might be uncomfortable or a little bit afraid, reach out to another group. I mean, I learned so much about the Japanese community growing up in Japantown. In fact, my mother had many of us in an after-school program where I learned to speak Japanese, and became part of the Japanese culture as a result of living in Japantown and opening up my heart. My mother went from being a community organizer in the civil rights movement to being one of the primary organizers in Japantown in an organization called CANE, Community Against No Hamachi Eviction. And at Galileo, I mean, who would have thought that I learned through Galileo every faction within the Chinese community. So I can walk through, Chinatown today, and many of the older political leaders from all the different factions know me really well, and I know them well because we went to high school together. Now, mine at that point in life was forced because I was thrown into all these different environments. I didn't have a choice, but I learned through that to reach out. And I specifically try to reach out now to different communities because I learned so much in my younger years, in my teenage years, that the desire for me is every year I'm like, okay, which country am I going to? Where can I have a different experience? How can I grow? But that empathy and understanding, it starts from the heart. It starts from an understanding that diversity is hard and it takes courage. But you just, that Nike commercial, just do it. And in doing it, that's how you grow and that's how you transcend the difference.
Thank you very much. I love it. Koi, I'm going to take you to Chinatown to do dim sum next time, because we actually been doing dim sum outside of Chinatown. Now that you have so many friends in Chinatown, I'm going there with you next time for sure. All right. That being said, I want John, please follow up with your question. And then with that question, actually, maybe LaVonsa, you could answer that first. But John, please.
Yeah, I want to say I'm in firm agreement with everything that was just said, especially Julie, when you talked about food and music. As a high schooler, it doesn't even have to be cultural, like just general pop music or eating at a fast food restaurant. It's probably the only place probably the most diverse place I've ever seen when it comes to high schoolers, because everyone likes to listen to music. They're both what I would classify as universal languages. But I think in our divisive world right now, just as important as fostering empathy with other people and trying to understand other people, we want to try and understand ourselves. I think in the face of discrimination, we're often reduced to a singular social narrative, whether that's based on our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, etc. And I would think that most of us view ourselves as an intersection of a bunch of identities, whether it's Black women or gay white men, lower class Asian Americans. So I wanted to ask you all, how have you guys conceived of your identities as an individual and as a member of society?
LaFonza, if you can take that question first.
You know, it's a great question. It's a great question, John. You know, the old advice of I think it's the know thyself. I think is a sort of parable of offering of our history. Here's what I know, John, and I'm gonna be really honest with you in my response here. I am a Black woman every single day I wake up and open my eyes. And that is, there is nothing I can do that will change that. And so for my identity, I center myself and how I show up in the world from that place. There are lots of pluses, lots of minuses, lots of tension within. But I start from who I am and who I see in the mirror. And we all have to define the relationship with the person that we see in the mirror. And that has been, most helpful to me. What I try to make sure that I do is, as I'm leaving the house and I'm having my conversation with the Black woman I see looking back at me, we talk about how do I want to show up today, and how I choose to show up every single day. I think is as much a demonstration of not only who I am, but the kind of people that I want to engage. I want to engage people who are on a pursuit of being better. It didn't say anything about their political party. I didn't say anything about that, what color their skin might be, and didn't even say anything about the language that they speak. For me, it really is about setting a daily intention to show up and to be better. And that's the kind of folks that I actually want to find myself in relationship to, and it helps to set the courage that I need that Chloe spoke about. The courage when you have an intention for your day, the courage that is required to meet that intention, so that when you wake up the next day and look yourself in the mirror, you know that you actually spoke to or did something that was on your purpose or on your intention. And so that's how I try to navigate that space of identity. And I show up who I am. I show up very much clear about who I am, and I set an intention for how I want my life to be, and I work my tail off to make that intention true.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Actually, I really echo your point, LaFonza. I think we cannot change what we look like, but we can change is our attitude and how we actually look at those issues. From my own, thanks to you and also Chloe, I'll have the courage to face those things at different perspective, a different way of doing it. I want to move on to the next question because I think that's kind of very relevant especially relevant to three of you guys as women leaders, and I want you guys to all answer that. Serena, please.
Before I ask my question, I also like to say I really resonated with what you said about how you should center your identity, and it's all a matter of choice of how you present yourself and setting daily intentions. And speaking of these identities, an intersection of identity that all of our speakers have today is being a female. And however, as female, we often feel discouraged to use our own voices, and we're often interrupted in conversations and not taken seriously. And especially Asian women, we are often stereotyped as quiet and submissive. So as female leaders, what is your advice towards encouraging women to feel confident in finding our own voice?
It's interesting
Look
that
at
you
all-
asked that question from the perspective of the Asian community, Serena. You know, the stereotype that Black women have to deal with is the exact opposite, right? Being aggressive and
thinking that.
loud, right? And so, but where we wind up as women of color is probably in the same place. So Asian women who were perceived as being, you know, submissive and quiet wind up, you know, maintaining that space or trying to live up to or fulfill. And Black women who are perceived as being aggressive and loud, we actually some of us choose to step back and also be then submissive and quiet and do the exact opposite. And so, you know, I think it's great that we're having this conversation because I think it helps us identify, frankly, the similarities that exist out there relative to stereotypes and how those stereotypes really land with all of us. You know, I would say for me in answering this question, and I want to be brief because I really am excited to hear what Julie's response to this. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I am trying to encourage her as I encourage myself, as I try to encourage every young leader that I engage around this notion of voice and empowerment. Empowerment has really been my life's work, and because I was a labor leader in a union that was 90% women and women of color. My life's work have really been focused on helping to support women in finding their voice. And I would say, you know, where we have found it, where I have seen the most success and how I try to encourage my daughter is the strength of not only self. I think it really does connect to John's question earlier, the strength of self, but also the strength of community. And that even when you're the only woman or young girl going into the room, you may be there by yourself, but you are not there for yourself. So your choice to be quiet or be submissive, you are not only choosing to silence your voice, you are choosing to not bring the voices of those, in some cases, tens of thousands of young girls who need you to speak up in this moment, who need your voice to be their megaphone, their cry for help, their shout for change. And so while again, not the strength of the community and knowing that we are there maybe by ourselves, but not for ourselves is an incredibly important part of this. And then, you know, I try to encourage my daughter to fully embrace all of who she is, knowing that there is no one who can say what she is going to say the way she is going to say it. That whoever needs to hear what she has to say needs to hear it because she's the only one who can say it. And so I think that, you know, it is not easy. I struggle with it. I know even, you know, as professional adults, women who sort of constantly know the voice in their head that's saying, oh, they expect me to do this, or they expect me to show up this way. That intention and really reminding yourself why you are there is really, really important. And I would advise young leaders to really think about their intention for the day and really being clear about why they are there and why their voices are so important. But that's my end of my rant. I really would love to hear Julie's voice here on this question.
Right now, I'm thinking about a conversation that I had with Amira Baraka once at Naropa University in Boulder, where we sometimes cross paths teaching. And he loved Betty Davis. And I think it's kind of funny to muse on the idea of Betty Davis influencing him and some of his inner strength. And it made me think about I grew up with my aunt who just passed, Evelyn Davis. She was an educator, and she died at the age of 100 in June, and she was a Rosie the Riveter. And I think there's so much about American history. We can't take the moments we're living in now and see them as a recipe for the past. So growing up, watching the movies with all these badass women, you know, Katharine Hepburn wearing pants, or Eartha Kitt sitting at the White House telling Johnson where to get off and how she paid for it. And I grew up with several individuals who were born in the late 19th century, and they didn't have kids, four of these aunts, and all four of them died in their hundreds. And they traveled, and one was we would ask, what do you do? What do you do? We never found out till they died. One was in burlesque in New York City, and they left home from they left North Carolina in the late 19th century, early 19th century. We'd be outside playing, and they had such a force field around them, wearing high heel shoes in their 90s. We'd drop everything we were doing to run in and absorb whatever it was. And likewise, I joke that my dad was my mom and my mom was my dad. So I grew up with all these images of very defiant women. They weren't thinking about what anybody thought of them. And they just, during World War II, women ran America in so many ways. And then, you know, after the war, people come home and then they build all these suburbs. And then Betty Friedan has to go back and correct that record. It's like, no, the house is a machine for living in. And I grew up in, you know, like, you have to remember also that American cities didn't look like this. They were like Philadelphia, New York, all these great urban centers of fomentation, and identity was different. And we talk about now being more diverse, but I'm not so sure, because when I think of growing up in Cleveland, where I am sitting right now, it was a strong Jewish community, Czechs, Hungarians. I think Cleveland had the second largest amount of Hungarians outside Budapest. So there were Christian, Jewish, and Roma, quote unquote, gypsy Hungarians that were around me, all these amazing communities. And then they all were whitened up, but they all were told that they were backwards, that, you know, stop wearing all those loud colors. That was a term applied to people who had red in their clothing palette, and also in their voices. Italians were called loud. And so I think that this pressure to assimilate into a certain notion of identity caused communities to give up thousands of years of culture, ways of making this sauerkraut or that. So back to my aunt, who's a badass rose derivator, she grew up at the tail end of the 1918 pandemic. Her mother's, which was my grandmother, her first husband died in that pandemic. And then next thing you know, you've got the depression and this and that. So again, the cities were very different. Cleveland is 48% Black right now. But when she was young, before the great migrations of the 40s and 60s, there weren't that many Black families. So in her community, there was just her and another family. And all these, she said the whole school smelled like garlic, because that's how they dealt with chasing away the flu or illness. And so they were Italians and just, you know, all these ethnic Eastern Europeans. And so they all shared recipes. She said that her mother's house was like the community center, because she would help people write letters so they could get a job. And this is the heart of the Depression. And everybody had to pull together to eat. So she said she never knew who was sleeping in the house when they came home. And she said, we were all girls, her and her siblings, except for my dad. And because the hobos, or as she called them, the people who were going across America trying to find work, they were housed in boarding houses, or people who just took them in as boarders. And she said the basement was full of different vats of fermenting things, from sauerkraut to different beers and wines, and all the neighbors were trading recipes. And then all the children would go gather the coal. And when they fell off, you could pick up the coal that fell off the train, but not go get the coal. So all these, and the women, of course, played a major role. I mean, not just as homemakers and
Julia, actually, on that, on that note, I think that's actually a very unique perspective because you mentioned specifically right after the war. And actually, I want to go to Chloe because I think Chloe, I want you to answer that question from your perspective and your insights on that front, please.
Well, I have to tell you, it's taken me a long time to be comfortable, as Regent Butler has mentioned, in my own skin. But I am confident and I'm comfortable in my own skin as a strong Black woman, and I embrace it. But when I look back to the time when I wasn't as comfortable, where I was intimidated sometimes in being the first one or the only one in the room, the thing that helped me to become comfortable was actually my early childhood suffering and having experienced so much suffering fueled a desire to want to make a difference and to change the world. And so when I encountered those obstacles, or when I encountered that discrimination, the desire to change the world sort of like overrode my own insecurities. And I started to realize that as long as I went back to my fundamental mission, which was a mission to relieve the suffering, and the realization that each and every one of us that are on this Zoom call have a mission that only we can fulfill. Only we can fulfill in our own unique selves. And really internalizing that started to give me the confidence. And I, every single day, I mean, it is also an intention when you wake up in the morning, is the intention that you are going to fulfill that mission no matter what obstacle is put before you. And I could say now, being a grandmother, and as Chuck knows, sometimes I'm called a troublemaker, I'm sometimes called a rebel. It doesn't faze me anymore. Because I know I'm staying true to my mission. So you may not feel that sense of mission right now, but as long as you get up every day with the intention to find your mission and to fulfill your mission, you will get there. But first and foremost, embrace who you are, because only you can fulfill that mission.
Very good. In the interest of time, I want to give time for a 10 minutes breakout session. So John, let's set up the breakout rooms right now. I know that there's actually tons of other good questions, actually, in fact, I think from Kaylin, from David, as well as from Hansen from Ohio. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to ask you guys to join the breakout sessions and ask those questions. I want actually Kaylin, I want David, I want Hansen to each in a different rooms and also ask those questions. But also, I think there's probably a lot of people who want to ask you guys questions as well. So John, let's do the breakout room. The way how we're going to do the breakout session for 10 minutes is we're going to just allow people to choose which leaders they want to join. So you can choose, by Chloe's name or by LaFonsa's name, by Julia's name. So John, are we ready yet?
Yeah, I think I have them open since the beginning. Can you all see them? It goes Fonza, Julie, Chloe, title.
Okay, great. On the very bottom. So if you guys go to the breakout rooms, we have the different names. So let's do 10 minutes of that. And basically, so 10 minutes we'll come back and we'll do a closing on that front, if that's okay. Is that Chloe, LaFonsa, and I guess Julie, any questions that before we do the breakout?
So do we have to, they have to click assign to? Is that, can you give them instructions on how to go into the assign themselves?
I think, John, you can assign our speakers to different rooms, right? And then the rest of the folks, they can just go in there. Is that right, John?
Yes, I can. I can assign the speakers to different, but everyone else, you guys can just choose which speakers room you want to go into, depending on what you've heard.
That sounds good.
So can we give people specific instructions on how to choose the rooms? That's what I'm asking. John, could
In
you
terms
guide
of
us
like
through that?
technology.
So I think
I-
how we're going to do it is you just go to the name on the very bottom, and then to the right, there's something called join button. So you just press the join button, then you'll get into that breakout room automatically.
Yeah, I've put them in their rooms. Okay, so we see that Jojo had joined. So if you click at the bottom, there are 4 squares, say breakout rooms. You click on that, and if you hover to your name to the right, you can assign yourself.
Right.
So
Okay.
please do that now.
So 7:30, let's come back. Okay, John? All right. Okay, see you guys in the breakout rooms right now.
Oh, I think she's gone. So let's go back to the main. Are we in the main session now?
We're in the
We're in the
main
main
session.
session.
It was just getting good.
I know, right?
It's,
I want maybe Jessica to say something about this. That I'm from Shanghai originally. So when people tell me, well, you know, this is how Asian American women are, I'm like, so what is the decibel rating for like an Asian American woman's voice? Because, and unfortunately, I'm from Shanghai, so I don't really abide by those things, right? So it just, I think like when we're talking about how to, it's not even just how loud our voices, it's how to use our voices. And we are all individuals. And these students, you can see that they came up with these questions themselves, all of them together. So you should remain confident that you all have voices. I mean, these were challenging questions. I was not that I doubted their abilities, but I really thought these were really good questions, you know? So are we waiting for the others?
no, I think we have everyone here. So I think in closing, we would like to, you know, put this on a positive note. And as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a leader, I always want you guys to take away something. So that being said, I think that we want to, you know, out of this conversation, we really want to rebuild solidarity and understanding between Black and Asian American communities. So I guess I want each of you guys, especially, you know, the participants, right, the speakers, what has the dialogue inspired you to do, you know, with the Asian community and with your own community? And I'd like the students, leaders first, to say that first, and then, you know, our female leaders to end their comments on that. But that being said, I'm gonna pick on a few people first. So
Right,
Serena.
or David and Kayla, please.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, David and Kayla, why don't you guys say that first? Do that. Okay, David. You're on mute, David.
Sorry, I cut off a little. Did you say a little earlier?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You cut off a little. Yeah, you cut off. I couldn't hear you. What did you say a little bit earlier?
Action items. What has it inspired you to do with the Asian community and with your own community, right?
Oh,
I mean, Asian community, that is us, but anyway, with other communities, right?
And
Yeah.
please introduce yourself, David.
yes. My name is David. Hello, everyone. I am going to be a senior, and I'm based in the Cleveland area. I first learned about this project a few weeks ago, and I was so excited to participate. And this conversation has definitely told me a lot about, like, us being young, that we need to mobilize and we need to speak out, because we are the most free to do. We are the most free to follow our own actions, and I believe that this conversation has really inspired me to, like, speak out and make sure to reach out and connect to people in order to help bridge these gaps between these minority communities.
Very good. Kayla?
Hi everyone, I'm Kayla Jong. I'm a senior at Western Reserve Academy in Hudson, Ohio. And after these conversations today, I just think this was really, like, productive, and I learned a lot. And I just think that what I take away from this is that I just want to be a part of more conversations like these, honestly, because they're the first steps towards building a more understanding and unified community around us. And I think our two groups can learn a lot from each other. So I think in the future, I definitely want to be a part of more of these.
Great. Serena?
Yeah, I think today it was like a really empowering and educational conversation. And I think my biggest takeaway from today's conversation is to go outside of my comfort zone and develop more empathy with different groups of people. It could be at school or just outside of school in general, and to learn to transcend the differences and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and find and realize the unconscious bias that I may have. And also about what Julie said, how music can bring people together. Like I myself, I play piano and I sing, and I will definitely like to utilize that more in the future.
Very good. John?
Yeah, I share the same sentiments as every one of the other students. I think this conversation today was very productive. I learned a lot. One topic that was brushed upon all the speakers was unconscious bias, and actually sat here and thought a lot about some things I thought I didn't believe, but it turns out a lot of my actions prove I do believe them. So I think from now on, I'll be interrogating my biases, my implicit biases a lot more, because I think those are things you can't immediately detect without a lot of introspection and self-reflection.
Great. Jessica?
Yeah, I think I also learned a lot from this conversation, and I'm pretty willing to attend lots of conversations just like this because I just get access to lots of information and perspectives of local people. And also I can understand like there is cultural similarities and difference between different groups of people. So I think in the future, I will spend more time of mine to do more work and to read more books and articles about other groups of people and to know the culture difference throughout the globe. And also because I'm a person who loves drawing pretty much. So I think I will use some artistic expressions to reveal my emotions and thoughts in the future.
Very good. And then with the speakers, Chloe.
There's one thing that Julie said is the intersection between the arts and organizing. In addition to my mother being an organizer, she was an artist. So I grew up in the theater. And talking to you tonight really brought back to me the arts and how important it is to, using the arts and food and culture to get people to open up more. So one of the things I intend to do is really to go deeper back into the arts that I grew up in, but also to be able to share more of my experiences, especially with young people, because true strength comes from within. It's not about how loud your voice is. It's about from within. And I think that people start to understand that when we can share our experiences with one another and have more of these kinds of dialogues. So thank you for what all of you have given me this evening.
Very good. Julie?
Yes, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I feel like I should say something to LaFonza and also to Chloe, and that's that I should thank the University of California, the school system for helping to pay my bills over decades, because every year, whether it's at Berkeley or someplace else, it's my heart. And so next time I'm in that vicinity, I hope to look you up. And let's not forget, even on a more basic level, how we can not just open up our heart. Home is where the heart is, and this is kind of a nod to you, LaFonza, with Airbnb. There were some initial snags in the early years of that company getting started, but I think that opening up one's home, that's where you can invite someone to dinner or for lunch or just for anything, or a game of volleyball. And it's been very powerful. My project, the project I run in Cleveland, is a nonprofit, and Airbnb is the primary door that brings the world into this place. And I can't even begin to describe the confluences and the sharing. And and I would say the majority of the individuals that come through our place have been from Asia and also Latin America. And that's also because it's an old building. And for some Americans, a place that's older than 20 years is old. And this is over 100 years old. And so there's some people who are interested in character and distressed furniture or wood, and some people just want a hotel environment. And so the primary thing I learned is the role of labor and care and maintenance, and how taking care of each other, taking care of the world can begin at home, just taking care of our most hyper local self. And whether that's hosting someone from another country or just having a meal, and also to never forget that so much is on the backs of those who we don't see. So we don't have to be activists like the ringleader or thinker. it's enough to begin to pick up litter on your street, around your block. And then next you know, somebody else might be doing that, or just to organize fellow students to just do some of the physical things that we think we're not supposed to do, whether it's sweeping the front yard or starting a movement of planting pollinator path and bring more beauty in that way.
Thank you very much. LaFonza?
Yeah, I will be very brief. I know we are well over time, Chuck. I would pick up on what Julie just left. This is a conversation that has reminded me and inspired me that each of us can do something, large or small, and more often than not we get paralyzed by the fear of being called to do the biggest thing. When that in order to get to the biggest thing, we first have to do something small. And to Julie's point, whether that's whether the gift you have or the offering that you can contribute is cleaning your own street. As a young Southerner, my grandmother used to call us sweeping around your own front door.
I love that. That's great.
Like that is as much a part of contributing to the movement of creating a more just society as leading the largest march. And so that's been my inspiration here, Chuck, and what I would take away from tonight is, no matter how busy we say we are never too busy to do something small.
Well said. I echo that. Despite I think that, I myself, I think I'm also always very busy, but I always make time for things that I care a lot about. So, that's well said. And I want to let the closing remark to Terry and her remarks, and then we'll end this. Terry, please.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It was so wonderful to hear everybody. And hearing all these words, I just have a few brief thoughts about, we talk so much about empathy, but I think that the first empathy we should have in order to have empathy for others is for ourselves. And what I mean by that, Chloe's talked about having the courage, right, to be ourselves. And maybe that courage just starts with knowing that you are a complex person. You are not defined by the things that culture and the outside want to say who you are. So having that real kind of inner strength, what she was speaking about, is that self-empathy and giving that to yourself, because I think sometimes we tend to go out into the world and see categorizations because we feel limited, right? It's a reflection of what's happening inside. And I feel committed right now just to do something simple, which is like the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want to do unto you. If we want, we all don't like it when we are judged and limited. So let's give that nuance that we want for ourselves to others. And I think we will see it multiplied and distributed, and it will do amazing things. And I appreciate so much with this balance of things that we're doing with the listening and the sharing and the vulnerability, opening our hearts. I will say that all the research, I know that it sounds like we're just coming up with common sense solutions, but all the social science research proves everything that we said today, that these are the solutions, right? They're right at our fingertips. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation, and I hope that you'll join us in the future for more like these.
Well, we have the third dialogue, by the way. Yeah. This is my last point, which is actually the homecoming, for UC Berkeley, which we will have dialogues with the Black, the African-American Black community, with the Hispanic community, with the Native American community and the Asian community. So we'll expand that conversation. Thanks to Chloe on that note. So I know we've kind of overtaken our time and way over. So I think except for the student leaders, everybody else, this is the official end of the program tonight. I really wanted to thank you again, Chloe,